There we go. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Aaron Essery. I am the Assistant Extension Specialist for Viticulture and Enology here at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Today, we're going to talk about wine faults. Five in particular, we'll cover Brettanomyces, TCA, Mercaptans, oxidation, and volatile acidity. So we will begin. Yep, okay, starting with Brettanomyces. So Brettanomyces smells like earthy, barnyard, pharmaceutical, Band-Aid, horse sweat, spice, gym socks. Brettanomyces is a yeast that will get into wine and produce these aromas. Is it salvageable? Mostly yes, because some people, depending on your perception, rather like a little bit of Brett. It can add a different, aroma, a different facet to wine that some people enjoy. So Brettanomyces is one of those that's sort of a fault, sort of not a fault, depending on the aroma it produces. We'll talk about that. And Brettanomyces is a yeast. It's not a bacteria. It's not a fungus. It's a yeast. Just like your Saccharomyces cerevisiae is a yeast during fermentation. Brettanomyces is a living yeast that will just get into your wine and produce these aromas. So Brettanomyces is a slow-growing yeast, usually found in the cellar and the vineyard. It's also found in oak barrels too. So if you're using oak barrels, clean them very well because Brettanomyces can survive and grow in oak barrels. The thing about Brett that keeps it around is that Brettanomyces feeds on 5-carbon unfermentable sugars as well as 6-carbon sugars. So if you kind of know your winemaking, you know your chemistry, Saccharomyces that we use for alcoholic fermentation only feeds on 6-carbon sugars. You see, Brett can feed on 5-carbon sugars, which keeps it around because it has a food source that the other yeast can't use. Wood sugars can be 5-carbon sugars. Glucose and sucrose, those are your 6-carbon sugars, or glucose and fructose are your 6-carbon sugars that are fermented. But things like xylose, I'm pretty sure, ribose is a 5. Don't quote me on that, but I think those are 5-carbon sugars that Brett feeds on. You see, so that's how they hang around. Red wine is more prone to Brett than white wine because red wine has a higher pH and also more substrates and more phenolics. Red wine has the pulp, the phenolics, the mast, the must that makes red wine, you see. But because of that, organisms like to feed on it. So higher pH, more phenolics, Brettanomyces prefers. Okay, before I go any further, I want to credit these next few slides to Miss Maddie Franklin at ODAF. These are hers. But we'll still talk about it. So the volatile compounds that Brett produces. On the left here, you have these 3 compounds, 4-ethylphenol, 4-ethylguaiacol, and then 4-ethylcatechol. A little tough to pronounce, so you can just say 4EP, 4EG, or 4EC. And so these are the aroma compounds that Brettanomyces produces. Does that make sense? 4EP smells like Band-Aid. 4EG smells like, medicinal, pharmaceutical type stuff. And then 4EC, that's your barnyard, horse sweat, gym sock type aroma. Probably the less desired of the other two. But the thing about Brett, which makes it attractive to some people, is these ratios and these concentrations of these aromas, especially the 4EP and the 4EG. If they're just right, they can add a level of complexity that's like pleasant. It's like, oh man, that's actually neat. I like that. Especially old world wines, if you've ever had a wine from France or Italy, sometimes they're made, dare I say intentionally, but just over thousands of years of winemaking, Brett creeps in a little bit, and some of their wines have Brett, and it's pleasant. And it depends on these ratios and the concentration of these compounds. So Brett effects on different varietals, compounds are usually present together, but in different ratios, like I was just saying. And depending on the grape too, the grape itself has precursors that will produce more or less of these compounds. So ratio levels determine usually the precursor naturally found in grapes. For example, Pinot Noir, a 3-to-1 ratio of 4EP to 4EG. You see it got 3 parts 4 EP, 1 part 4 EG. That makes it, Band-Aid type aroma. Cabernet Sauvignon with a 9:1 ratio. You see Syrah 23. So different ratios, different varieties, different aromas. Is it a fault? Is it not? That's up to you. Okay, so just different ratios and different varietals, spec, taste, and aroma. Just a little chart of how these ratios and grape varieties, present themselves. I won't go through it line for line, but you can see 4 EP and 4 EG in different ratios produce leather or barnyard. It can produce a pungent spice, or it can just smell like a pure Band-Aid, which is probably not what you want in your wine. So that ratio is probably too much to make anything pleasant. And then here are some, I don't know if, I guess I did not make this chart, so I guess somebody must have really chemically analyzed these wines and found these ratios of 4 EP, 4 EG, 4 EC. You see concentrations in the wine, which gives it its aroma. So I doubt anyone can really, aside from like a research lab or a big winery, can really chemically analyze these wines to tell you the exact molecule that's producing that aroma. But just know you have Band-Aid, pharmaceutical, horse sweat, barnyard. These specific compounds and different ratios in different wines, different varietals, give you these different aromas. That's, some can be good, some can be bad. And I think this next slide so Maddie put this one in here. Brett, there's 2 sides of Brett. There's the good, the funk, the bacon, the game, smoked duck crackling that you can get. And then the bad is also like the pungent Band-Aid, the medicinal barnyard, sweaty gym sock, rancid cheese. So if you get Brettanomyces in your cellar and you start to detect it in your wine, do you like it? Do you not? Is it appealing? Is it not appealing? Some people like it. A touch of Brett can be good in the right red wine, but a lot of Brett can usually be detrimental and it's just unappealing. Depends on the aromas, the compounds that it produces. So mitigating Brettanomyces. Let's just say I don't even want to mess with it. Just get it out of my cellar. I don't even want to experiment with it. Some things you can do to kind of mitigate Brettanomyces. Aggressively clean barrels with hot steam or water. A steam machine is great because it has like it's a machine that produces steam, and on one end you have a barrel wand, and you just put that wand in your barrel and it just steams up the barrel. It's a great way to clean it. Pressure washers, just regular old, pressure washers you can put into the bung hole and just blast the inside of a barrel. I've done that too. That's a good way to clean barrels. Just lots of hot water, lots of steam. Of course, keep your barrels topped up. Don't ever let them get low or partially low because you're just asking for microbes to grow. Keep cellar temperatures low, around 65. That fluctuates a little bit. Some people say 62, some people say 68. So 65 is anywhere in there, you're fine. Keep cellar equipment clean. Keep all cellar equipment clean. It seems like a fundamental basic thing, but a lot of times we just forget. We got a lot going on. I can't, keep stuff clean. And then 1, 2, I thought was kind of neat. Don't delay between alcoholic fermentation and malolactic fermentation. There's a lot of stylistic differences in making wine, but if you want to like try to just, I don't ever want Brett in my wine, don't delay alcoholic fermentation and then go right into malolactic fermentation, because those microbes are going to take up all the resources that allow Brett to grow. Brett can still grow later on, but it's less likely, you see. So what good yeast like, bad yeast like too, even though malolactic bacteria is actually bacteria. Anyway, I digress. So don't delay. If you don't ever want to try Brett, alcoholic fermentation, malolactic fermentation sequentially, just back to back, don't delay between the two. Any quick questions on Brett real fast? Just burning questions? Okay, I'll keep going. To the next one. So this is 2,4,6-trichloroanisole. That is the proper name for that chemical compound, 2,4,6-trichloroanisole, also known as cork taint. TCA is the shorthand. So 2,4,6-trichloroanisole is TCA, is cork taint, and that's the fault we're going to cover now. So 2,4,6-trichloroanisole. It's fun to say once you learn to say it. Cork taint. This smells like wet cardboard, musty basement, a wet newspaper. It's very pungent, and sometimes it can even mute. It can just mute the wine entirely. It's a muted aroma. I don't know. it happens, I guess. I've yet to experience that, but definitely wet cardboard, musty basement. I've smelled TCA in wine before, and it's like it's bad. Is it salvageable? No, no. There's really nothing you can do. This one is a hard fault. Like, sometimes things can be, oh, it's kind of pleasant, it's kind of not. I don't think anybody likes TCA. I just don't see it as a pleasant fault in anyone. Because I mean, like I say, musty basement, wet newspaper, it's no good. And it's very harsh on your nose. Once you smell it, it's like identifiable immediately. It's like, that's cork taint. 2,4,6 trichloroanisole is the chemical responsible. And I'll get to how that comes about. I guess I'll talk about it now. TCA, it's produced by fungus that comes in contact with chlorine or bleach, chlorine, and lignin. Lignin is wood. They're the same. So pallets in your cellar, barrels in your cellar, wooden staircases in your cellar, pillars that hold your cellar together. You see, if you have wood in your cellar, and you have chlorine there, you can have a fungal infection that will produce TCA. That's kind of how it happens. I say fungal infection. Microbes are everywhere, like on your skin, in your mouth, on your tasting bar counter. Microbes are everywhere. You just can't get rid of them. But the danger here is when you clean your cellar with chlorine and you have wood present, you're just asking for this combination to occur. So particularly penicillium and aspergillus, there's a few more, but penicillium and aspergillus are these fungi that if they come in contact with chlorine and wood, they produce 2,4,6 trichloroanisole, which can ruin your wine. Yeah, it's a neat one, but a weird one too. I'll explain a little more how it happens. But I'll say 2,4,6 trichloroanisole, or TCA, has an incredibly low detection threshold. Some people can smell it down to the parts per trillion, as opposed to parts per million. When we make like potassium metabisulfite additions in wine, we measure in ppm, parts per million. But TCA can be detected in parts per trillion. And some people are extremely sensitive to it. Like, usually women, actually, they have a more acute sense of smell and taste, and women can usually pick up TCA quicker and better. It's more sensitive. A weird thing too is TCA can sometimes inhibit your olfactory system, which I think immunes the aroma. I just read about that. I'm not sure. Maybe it's like genetic specific, but just know TCA is a very low detection threshold. It doesn't take a lot to spoil your wine. The main takeaway with this is never use chlorine in a winery. Don't get it around your winery. Don't use bleach. Don't use chlorine, Clorox wipes. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've done it because they're convenient, but like, you're just asking yourself for this TCA molecule to come around. More of what happens, from what I understand, is you have fungus and microbes that are just ever present in all things in life. They get on wood. Like I say, you got oak barrels in your cellar, that's wood, but then you start cleaning your winery with chlorine, and it's that chlorine molecule that the fungus tries to get rid of. It just, through metabolic reactions, the fungus itself takes the chlorine and makes 2,4,6 trichloroanisole in the presence of wood. Like, lignin has to be there too. I hope you read up more about it, and you could probably tell me something about it, but I've tried to understand this. You need wood and you need chlorine, and then the fungus, like, just metabolic reactions, produces 2,4,6 trichloroanisole. That's as much as I know. I try to read more about it, but quick answer: get chlorine out of the winery. TCA can also come from the cork tree, where natural cork comes from. You see, that's why it's called cork taint. If you didn't know, natural cork is truly natural. There is a tree usually grown in Portugal. That's a large portion of these trees are in Portugal and Spain. The natural cork is harvested from a tree and like punched out, and that's a natural cork. And these fungi are everywhere. They can be found on this tree. And then back in the 80s, they would use pesticides and fungicides to like protect their trees because they're harvesting cork from it. Well, it turns out that there's a little chlorine in those fungicides, and what doesn't kill the fungus only irritates it and makes it produce TCA. So read about it because it's fascinating, but just know You need wood, you need chlorine, and you need fungus. And the easiest way to get rid of it is just get rid of all chlorine. So don't have bleach in your cellar. And here is the cork tree. So Corcus suber is the cork tree. And yes, natural cork is truly natural. It's that cool. I mean, they'll harvest it and they process it a little, they wash it, give it a deep water bath, but then they just punch out corks. Like, it's so cool. They just, like, I mean, companies just make natural corks for wine bottles. It's truly, truly natural. I think it's so cool. Just for you scientific brain people, chlorine is a halogen. You see, this whole 9 group is missing. Every element on this group 9 is, I say missing, but there's an unpaired valence electron in that group that just wants to bind with stuff. So, you know, group 9 is a halogen, chlorine is a halogen. Don't use chlorine in your cellar. Get it out of your cellar. Fungus will turn it into TCA and it will spoil your wine. Okay, the different forms of musty taint. So TCA is the main chemical responsible, but if you really want to dig into it and nitpick it, there's also TBA, which is 2,4,6-tribromazole, which is still, you would still call it musty taint or cork taint. You know, there's TECA, there's PCA. All of these are like slight derivatives of musty taint, cork taint. I don't know of anybody who really nitpicks and tries to find the difference aside from like a research university, but just know TCA, cork taint, that's your main chemical responsible. But all of these are derivatives of microbial degradation of wood or lignin that, you know, that's responsible for musty taint. So combating cork taint, get a trusted source of corks. I think that's, well, you start by removing all your bleach and chlorine from your winery. Like, get it out. Don't even clean with it. Don't even pretend, yeah, it's a good cleaner, but it's also a good way to run your wine. So that's your first step. But then also get a trusted source of corks. So some of these cork manufacturers will actually test for TCA in-house before they sell them. Find a manufacturer that does that, and, you know, because cork manufacturers know, like, they know I can harvest a cork tree and TCA might be there at harvest. So they test them. So get a trusted source of corks, remove all bleach from your winery. And then another one is just to use synthetic corks or screw caps, but they're not as cool. Anyway, I don't mean that. They can be cool, but there's something about a natural cork that's just, everybody loves them. If you didn't know, take a moment and then look at these. So on the left are 4 different corks. One of them is truly synthetic. So, and that's number 1. A synthetic cork is made of polyethylene, whereas 2, 3, and 4 are still natural corks. The difference is number 2 is a 1-piece natural cork. Like that picture I showed, you go, you harvest a cork tree, you punch out a 1-piece natural cork. That's what number 2 looks like. 3 and 4 are still natural corks, but what they are, they're agglomerated. They are bits and scraps of cork that was left over that couldn't make a full cork. So they just grind them all up, compress them together, and make an agglomerated natural cork. So 3 and 4 are still natural corks. They're just not a 1-piece natural cork. You see, 1-piece natural corks are usually reserved for like higher end wines. It's like, this is good stuff. Put a natural 1-piece natural cork in it. It's just classy. But only number 1 is a true synthetic cork, and you can see the difference. You can feel the difference. So just know, if you have agglomerated corks, those are still natural. They're just not a 1-piece natural. And of course, you can always use screw caps. I mean, that's famous with a lot of white wines, a lot of rosés. Just, install a screw cap and don't even mess with corks. Your choice. Okay, that was TCA. Any dying questions on that? We still have 3 more faults, and then we will open up to a Q&A at the end. Okay, all right, I will just keep going. Mercaptans and volatile sulfur compounds. So these smell like rotten eggs, cabbage, onion, garlic, rubber, flint, a burnt matchstick, if you ever smelled that. These are all mercaptans, volatile sulfur compounds. You see any of these. Are they salvageable? Mostly, yes. You can usually salvage a mercaptan or a VS, a volatile sulfur compound. Sometimes, most of the time, it depends on the severity. Mercaptans are reduced, which is the opposite of oxidized. So oxidation is a fault we're going to talk about next. There's oxidation and then there's reduction, and the two are equal opposites of each other. Reduction is the gain of an electron. Oxidation is the loss of an electron. And we talk about a redox reaction. We're talking about these two together. I'm not the best chemist in the world, but I understand a little bit. The thing with mercaptans is that a little bit of oxygen or a moderate amount of oxygen can sometimes remedy these problems. So if it's just a reduction issue, give it some oxygen. It's like, this wine kind of smells like garlic and cabbage. Open up the lid, let it sit out for 30 minutes, and then smell it again. Sometimes it just goes away. It's that simple. Sometimes, not all the time. Okay, so in wine, reduction can actually create aromas in the absence of oxygen. And we always talk about avoiding oxygen after fermentation, and that's good. I'll always do that. Avoid oxygen after fermentation. This is reductive winemaking, and it's usually beneficial. Sometimes you can overdo it too much and you need a little oxygen, but for the most part, avoid oxygen. Now, just so we understand, lack of oxygen during fermentation is bad. Yeast need oxygen for survival and growth. You see, so during fermentation, do give your vat of wine, of must, of juice that you're fermenting, give it oxygen. The yeast need it. If you don't, this will create H2S or hydrogen sulfide, which is that rotten egg aroma. So hydrogen sulfide, smells like rotten eggs, can persist in wine, is usually caused by a lack of oxygen or nitrogen during fermentation. Yeast do need nitrogen too, but if you're not punching down, if you just ferment a tank and you let it ferment without ever touching it, that's going to create H2S. That's bad news. Wine sitting on lees for too long can create H2S as well. There's a lot of stylistic winemaking. A lot of things you do in the wine world can be beneficial or bad, and it's like, subjective sometimes. Is it good? Some people serve, was it sur lees? Some people age wine on lees for weeks, months at a time. That's a stylistic choice, but just know sitting on lees for too long can create hydrogen sulfide. And then H2S can then progress into further ethyl mercaptans, and just, it can get out of control, out of hand. So do punch down during fermentation, give your vat oxygen at fermentation, and then don't set it on lees for months at a time unless you really know what you're doing. So with that, I'll talk about yeast assimilable nitrogen, or YAN. You may have heard of YAN before. YAN is the nitrogen that yeast need for survival and growth, specifically ammonia, ammonium, and then free amino nitrogen. Those three together, ammonia, ammonium, and free amino nitrogen, make up YAN. And those are the nitrogen sources that Saccharomyces cerevisiae needs for proper fermentation, for proper growth and development. To carry your ferment to a clean finished wine, YAN and oxygen need to be present. So, like I said, ferments need a healthy measure of YAN for successful fermentation. Yeast need nitrogen. There's tools out there to measure YAN, but there's not like an easy way. You have to be making wine for some time, and then you start learning how to process YAN. It's still difficult for me to do, but it's not impossible. So proper YAN levels of juice and must, 150 to 300 milligrams per liter. If you're a numbers person and you just I like everything by the numbers, your YAN level should be 150 to 300. I still don't know of a quick, easy way to do that, you see, but it's possible. Most of the time, even still today, I just pick grapes and it's like just ferment it. Most of the time, your nitrogen levels are fine. Most of the time, but your vineyard better than anyone. Okay. What feeds good yeast also feeds spoilage yeast. If you've ever used DAP, you see, diammonium phosphate, that's a source that can be used to feed yeast during fermentation. Just know sometimes you feed bad yeast too. So you don't want to just dump a whole bunch of nutrients into your fermenting vat because you think you're feeding yeast. Well, you are, but you can also be feeding spoilage microbes too. So there's a balance. You want just enough in there. And like I say, most of the time, you're okay. I digress. I just wanted to talk about YAN for a little bit. Now we're back to mercaptans. So these are some compounds, aroma compounds, that can be produced during reductive winemaking, and they give these aromas. And on the right are the thresholds. A lot of them are in parts per billion. You see, they're parts per billion ppb. But H2S, hydrogen sulfide, that's usually the main one, rotten eggs. But then you can also get, ethyl mercaptans, methyl mercaptans, which are just all these funky, mostly unattractive aromas. Burnt matchstick, sometimes you find that in like a good Sauvignon Blanc, and that can be lovely because it's like a dry, Sauvignon Blanc with a little bit of burnt flint. It's like, oh, it's pleasant. It's up to you, and it depends on these concentrations. A lot of it, like I've never had a wine that's just like, oh, cabbage, like no, So the concentrations and the aroma and the varietal itself, you see that is it a Riesling, is it a Sauvignon Blanc? It makes a difference too. But these are mercaptans, these are the chemicals, these are the aromas, and it's usually a lack of oxygen. So yeah, mitigating mercaptans. First and foremost, just open your tank up. If you have a tank of wine, you're like, this smells like garlic, open it up, give it some oxygen. O2 is usually the first thing to help remedy mercaptans. I say that punch down and pump over twice a day during fermentation. Don't ever not punch down. If your wine is fermenting, punch the cap. If you have a cap, you see it like you come in the next day and the cap's like floated, punch it down. Always punch your cap down. Rack off lees accordingly. Again, stylistically, it's up to you, but multiple racks is expected throughout the life of the wine. Your first solution is just expose the wine to oxygen. Open the tank up, let it breathe for a little bit. Now, tannin additions. These are some good stuff. I've used these before. Tan Elevage and Tan Max Nature are really good to remedy some of these mercaptans. If you got like, you got some funk in this wine and it's a sulfur compound and it's a mercaptan, and it's like, I can't get it out, try a tannin addition. Tan Elevage, Tan Max Nature will usually take care of it. And then if you need to bring in the big guns, you just got some stuff, I got a really copper sulfate and activated carbon. Copper sulfate, only a couple drops should do the trick. It will make your wine hazy, so it might lead into some other faults. I don't know. And then, but also activated carbon. So activated carbon will take a lot of things out of wine. That's probably your last resort. So if you have a problem with mercaptans, just go down the list here, try these things, tannin additions especially, but then activated carbon will take out a lot of stuff. Oxidation. Somebody joined. I don't know what happened to those green lines. I think somebody may have messed with something, but we'll just keep going here. Okay, oxidation. Smells like caramelized, nutty, bruised apple vinegar or sherry, if you've ever had those wines. Is it salvageable? Sort of. Again, it's your perception on what's good and what's not. Port wines and sherry wines are heavily oxidized. That's their style. So like a good port from Portugal is heavily oxidized. That's why they call it port. It's that style, and some people love it. There's a whole slew of people that really love port wines, really love sherry wines. So if you have a wine that's a little too much oxidation, think about making it a port style wine. But just be careful too, because oxidation can lead to VA if it gets out of hand. But if it stays right there at that caramel, nutty type aroma, you're gonna make it a sherry style wine. More chemistry. There's two types of oxidation: enzymatic oxidation, chemical oxidation. And just as we mentioned, oxidation is the loss of an electron. So reduction is the gain of electron, oxidation is the loss of an electron. Those two are, two of the same coin, but we're going to talk about enzymatic oxidation here. So, enzymatic oxidation is when you have an enzyme in the presence of oxygen and a phenol. Those two come together to produce what's called a quinone. It's very similar to a sliced apple. If you've ever taken an apple and sliced it and you see that browning happen, that's enzymatic oxidation. And an apple is a fruit, a grape is a fruit. So you still have these enzymes together. Oxygen is always present, and then you have phenolics in both. So browning in all juice or must is very similar to slicing an apple. You see, that's enzymatic oxidation. This is a bigger concern in white wines because they cannot handle, they don't have the tannins and color compounds as red wines. So red wines can handle oxidation a little bit better. White wines are very prone to oxidation. Okay, chemical oxidation. This is the true loss of an electron an atom, an ion, a molecule with one unpaired valence electron. These are highly reactive and unstable, and they just start wreaking havoc. Antioxidants will help protect against chemical oxidation by binding to free radicals. I hope I'm not boring anybody with this deep, scientific oxidation, but just know antioxidants will remedy free radicals. Free radicals, like just medically speaking, are in your body. They cause cancer. You eat antioxidants to prevent free radicals, but antioxidants are present in grapes as well. So the grape has a natural tendency to combat free radicals. In wine, you need oxygen, metal ions, and phenolics for chemical oxidation. So this is just another little example. Unpaired valence electron, you got antioxidants just naturally present in the grape. The wine will try to combat oxidation through free radicals. But what happens is, just with time, the wine, the juice, the must, they run out of antioxidants. It's not an unlimited supply. That's why we use KMBS. That's why we add potassium metabisulfite to wine to try to eliminate oxidation through the binding effect of free SO2. So that's why we do it. So mitigating oxidation, keep your free SO2 levels up. 15 to 40 ppm, and you do this by the addition of potassium metabisulfite. I've done a webinar on sulfur dioxide alone. There's bound SO2 and there's free SO2. Bound SO2 does nothing. Free SO2 is what you want. So have a way to measure your free SO2 in wine. There's a few ways to do it. Figure one out, and just, you need a number. You need to measure your free SO2. Adding potassium metabisulfate to keep up your free SO2 levels is the best way to protect against oxidation and microbial spoilage. So do that. Sparging with inert gas. I've talked about it often in other webinars. N2 gas, which is nitrogen gas, or argon gas. Those are your two best gases to use to sparge against oxidation. And then if it's not out of control, like if it's just a little nutty, a little caramel, sell it as a port style wine. Like, that's what port is. Port is highly oxidized wine. You can't call it port in the US because that's reserved for Portugal, you see, just like champagne is reserved for Champagne, France. Prosecco is reserved for Italy. Port is reserved for Portugal. But you can still make a port style or a sherry style wine. That's totally allowed. So it's totally a perspective point at that point. Okay, VA. This is the last fault we'll get into, volatile acidity. I'm sorry for this green line on the screen. I don't know what to do there, but just bear with me. Okay, VA smells like nail polish remover. I mean, to the T. It's that ethyl acetate, I'm pretty sure, that causes that aroma. We'll talk about that. Can smell like vinegar too. But if you've ever had, especially women, nail polish remover, that's volatile acidity, and it can get into your wine and ruin it completely. Is it salvageable? No, really not. You can remove VA using something called reverse osmosis, but that's very, very expensive. And unless you're doing like 3,000 gallons at a time, you see, if you're doing less than 3,000 gallons, it's not worth it just because it's so expensive. So if you get like a 500-gallon tank of wine and it gets VA, it's like, oh, sorry, man. Like there's nothing you can do. So don't even, just prevent it. That's the best solution, prevent it. Acetic acid bacteria is responsible for acetic acid production, specifically Gluconobacter and Acetobacter. It's Acetobacter that's found in wine in the wine cellars. Gluconobacter is usually in the vineyard because it likes glucose, hence the name Gluconobacter. But Acetobacter is your main corporate. It's found in the cellars and in wine. Okay, so the progression of VA. First, you need this bacteria present, and then you need oxygen, and that's it. If you have Acetobacter present and you have oxygen present, you are on a slippery slope to acetic acid production, and that's no good. So the bacteria will produce acetic acid by oxidizing alcohol and glucose in the presence of oxygen. And then step 3B is just kind of progression even more. Acetic acid can then further undergo esterification to form ethyl acetate. And I'm pretty sure it's this ethyl acetate that's that nail polish smell. I'm pretty sure that's it. But they both are pretty harsh, acetic acid and ethyl acetate. Anyway, you can have both aromas that volatilize at room temperature, which reveals themselves. That's VA. That's sorry. That's VA. And it's no good. Okay, I think we're getting towards the end. So VA level detection thresholds. You'll have these slides. I'll send them out so you don't have to rememorize these numbers, but VA less than 0.6 grams a liter is mostly undetectable by humans. It's when VA levels get between 0.65 and 0.9 that humans start to detect them. More people are more sensitive. Some people are not so sensitive, but between 6 and 9, 0.6 and 0.9 grams a liter, VA becomes detectable. Wines with a VA greater than 1 gram a liter is in danger of spoiling. And in fact, 1.2 grams a liter of volatile acidity in a wine is the legal limit in the United States. So if your wine has 1.2 grams a liter or more, you actually cannot sell it. It's illegal. The only way is to test it. I don't really know the repercussions of what would happen, but just know if you're approaching it on 1 gram a liter, you're in danger. All wines, sorry, that should be even S, all wines are made with some level of VA, truly, usually between 0.3 and 0.75 grams a liter. Every single wine on the planet usually has some form of VA in it. It's just below that detection threshold. And it's said that wines with a 0.0 gram a liter VA has no aroma at all because it's volatile. The volatile acidity will actually bring out other aromas too. That's what they say, at least. So that sounds like a neat science experiment to me. Mitigating and measuring VA. The first thing to do is just prevent it entirely. Don't even, keep your tanks topped up, keep everything clean. Don't let oxygen into your wine. Excuse me, I'm going to mute you real fast again. Please wait till the end. Top barrels up, sparge tank barrels, but there's also something called an ozone machine. I've used this before in a cellar. It produces O3 gas. So these microbes need oxygen, right? And if there's O3 present, the microbe will take in O3 thinking it's oxygen, because it is, but it's O3. And what that does is it ruptures its cellular processes and kills the microbes. So ozoning your entire cellar is a good way to rid of microbial activity. But it's kind of toxic to humans, don't breathe it. But what you would do is, like, as you're leaving for the day, these are on timers, so you can just turn it on for 2 hours, let it ozone your cellar overnight, and then come back the next day, open the doors, let it air out, and you're fine. I've done that before. I have, and it seems to work. I mean, there's really no way to tell unless you're just like swabbing your counters and plate them on an auger dish. But you can buy an ozone machine for about $650, put it in your cellar, turn it on once a week, and then that'll help keep down microbial populations. If you're wanting to measure VA, there's something called a cache still. It's on the far right. It's about a $900 piece of equipment, but it will measure your VA. You have to know how to use it too. I can help you with that, truly. I've ran one 100 times when I was a master student. So I know a cache still pretty well. If you're a good chemist, you can make one for about $150, but that's totally up to you. And again, I'd be glad to help you with that as well. But that's about your only way to measure VA. You have to boil the wine, you have to capture the distillate, and then you have to titrate the distillate. That'll tell you your VA. Just FYI. Okay, and I think we're getting towards the end. Yeah, so that concludes the presentation. If you want to read more about these faults, I please do. They're fascinating. Here's a couple books that I've personally read. Flawless by Jamie Good, Understanding Wine Faults. Wine Folly by Madeleine Paquette. She's great. She talks about all the wine aromas and all the varieties of aromas and why wine has the varieties it does. Wine Microbiology by Kenneth Fugelsang and Charles Edwards. That's a good one. I've actually read that. Concepts in Wine Chemistry. It's dense, it's heavy chemistry read. I've not read the whole book. I mean, it's a textbook, but it's a good one. It talks about wine chemistry. And then the Grape Grower's Handbook. This is more for vineyard owners. I've read this book entirely too, cover to cover. I'm not even kidding. It's a great book, but it's all about viticulture practices. So it really says nothing about wine, a little bit, but mostly about growing wine. And with that brings us to the end. Thank you, and let me stop the recording and we will open it up to any questions.